But over here, I'm going to have Vickerbean and Rookvik, which is that town with a real pretty church. I have that castle sitting up there, like the church that sits on the hill. So this ties in, and these are places that are real important in my story. So I'm trying to kind of, I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but I got the idea. I actually got the idea from Gilmore. I had this castle, and I had it on a giant, this castle here, on a giant mountain that was like 7 feet high, or 5 feet high, that the trains ran through. And he goes, oh, you need to put some orcs running like Helm's Deep in the Lord of the Rings. And it just kind of got the wheels turning. It was kind of like, well, maybe not orcs, but how could this tie into my apocalypse novel? And in the meantime, the apocalypse novel changed a lot. To Sweden as the location, and these different locations that are on the maps upstairs became very important.
So tell me about your maps on the wall. Is this your...
Well, that's my drawing of the... Do you mean the ones upstairs or the ones here?
Right here.
That's my blueprint of the actual railroad.
Down here?
Yeah, that's a sketch. It's actually a scale drawing of it. And it's just on pencil and on graph paper. But it's basically how this is going to play out in here. And I actually want to punch a hole through the wall. I haven't gotten approval from the superintendent on this yet. And make this stone room into a giant mountain scene, floor to ceiling, where the train comes through here. There'd be like a fold-down bridge, so you could still get out the door, but this would be like a giant mountain scene where the train ends up, which happens in Norway when it finally gets to the north. I'm not sure where it came from. I think it was my dad getting me toy trains in Sweden when I was for my first Christmas there. And there's a picture of me upstairs against with my original Markland train set, and that's a German kind of trains that they don't sell typically in America. These are from, I have a hard time finding them. You can order them from overseas, but I bought it from, there was a hobby shop in Pittsburgh and there's one in Ohio that sells them. But there's a picture of me standing right here with my train board in front of me from when I was like 11 years old in this basement. And it's the same trains that I have that are over on the track there right now. Some of the old, and I've, like these are this is from my train set. This is from my original train set, and so you can see how dented up and stuff they are. Was from my original train set when I was 5 years old. So, and then this is of places that I hung out with when I was a kid. And I think maybe riding on the trains in Sweden, when we first went over there, we went from Gothenburg across the country on the steam train. There were steam trains there that you'd see out the window and stuff. It was probably an electric train we rode on. But that's in that 50 Years of Sweden video. So I'm guessing that was what got me interested in it. And I think the fact that it's a mechanical toy, you know, like so you have to like hook it up and wire it and so on. And I think a lot of my hobbies since then that was sort of the impetus, the mechanical stuff. How I got started in my hobbies, I think probably began again working on things like building a toy train set in the basement with my dad. And then this house itself, so my dad bought, wherever we lived, whether it was in Fox Chapel or in Pittsburgh, what he did for work was he was an engineer, but what he did for fun was he would do projects on the weekend. And then when we bought this house had been basically trashed by the former owners, so we gutted it and rebuilt it from scratch. And that's how I got into I think how I got into carpentry and painting that I ended up doing for a living. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and we would come and work. We came and worked for 3 weeks straight. He'd like leave at 6 in the morning, come over here, and at about 10 in the morning, we'd stop for coffee, which would be black coffee from his thermos. And then at lunch, we'd have more black coffee and liverwurst and cheese sandwiches with yellow mustard. And that was lunch. And whether you liked it or not, you'd been working for 5 hours or 6 hours, and you were extremely hungry. And so, you know, that's what got into. And so I think the stuff like out in the barn and so on, we could probably just walk out to the barn this way. I'll turn off the lights. And this is kind of what the house, the original house, actually looked like. With, you know, the stone walls and the rough stuff. But that kind of became sort of building the house from scratch became part of what got me interested in the hobbies. And then working on the old cars is something I got into as a teenager. When I think the other thing, probably the other mechanical thing, was the fact that, be careful on the step going backwards here, but we had these fields and they were all overgrown, and my dad got a riding lawnmower, and I really wanted a go-kart or a motorcycle, and he wouldn't buy me either one, even though my friends' dads bought them motorcycles and stuff. And so I kind of used the golf cart, the mower as a kind of go-kart. And I got into cutting the fields down. So all these fields, I was the one that cut all the brush and everything else, so I could ride around on the mower like it was a go-kart. And so I started mowing because I wanted to drive the mower. And my mom used to take me golfing, like to practice golf. My two rules were I had to be able to drive the golf cart, and I had to be able to, she would buy lunch at the country club restaurant where I'd get like a hamburger and french fries, which was like a huge treat.
And who's this?
That kind of led to the working on the old cars. And what's funny is I have a picture of myself in the MG, my first MG. My sister dated a guy who lived up over the hill here, and he had an MG. And they're married. They've been married now for like 45 years. I'm going upstairs. And with the MG, his dad sold me I worked at the country club, and I got paid for working at the country club, and I used that money to buy my first car when I was like 14. And I wasn't allowed to drive it on the road. In fact, you could hardly ever get it to run. But when I'd get it to go, I would drive up and down the driveway, because we've got this long driveway. And I would sneak into the neighborhood and circle around and come back down. And it was a 1958 MG, and that's what I have upstairs here. Be careful again on the steps. So this MG, this is the one, this is also from this neighborhood. And it was the other person that had an MG that got me interested in the old cars was Robbie Marshall and Pete Marshall lived up over the hill and would walk to school with me. And Pete was older, and he bought, his uncle gave him this car when he was 16. And Robbie and I weren't old enough to drive, but I was probably 12 or 13, we'd sit in it and make driving noises, car noises. And Pete had it painted British Racing Green, which was really cool. And I didn't see it. I didn't see the car for about 40 years, but I found it again in the neighborhood in town here. And so this is I've taken it apart and sandblasted it, which is why it looks like it does here. And this will be the third or fourth one I've done from the ground up. The first one I had when I was 13, I sold when I was in graduate school because I needed the money, and I couldn't take a sports car to Boston to go to college. So I got a regular car. And but this one I found when I was working at a construction site in the middle of town. And I approached Pete about it, and he was like, no, I'm going to restore that. And then about 4 or 5 years later, out of the blue, he called me, and I ended up buying it off him. And this is what I've done is I'm talking about making a MG go-kart. This is the frame, and I've been welding on the frame to get all the basics of the frame done, and then I have all the mechanical parts to put back on it. And I'm hoping to make it the frame function, put the wheels, the tires, the engine. I've worked on the engine for about 4 years. Let me turn the light on here behind you. The engine I got at a yard sale. This is a uprated engine from an MGB, which is about a 10-year newer engine. And I got it from a yard sale up over the hill here for $5. But I tore it apart and worked with guys from a race shop down in Virginia to rebuild it. I had it in the car running already. I had it in the frame running. Now I'm waiting to put the wheels and all the other stuff to hook up on it to get it to go again. So that's that shop. And then this is my paint room and wood supply for a number of things. This is oak from a staircase at church, and cherry and hemlock from building the garage. So those hobbies come out of the working on the house in the beginning, and then eventually doing as a contractor. And when I was in graduate school in Boston, my last year and a half, I worked in a wood shop with a cabinet maker, and so I've made my own wood shop here. This is one of the main reasons for the barn. As a contractor, I had the room where the MG is as a spray booth to spray paint stuff, and here I had the woodworking shop to do, like I'd bring home, like even this week I worked on some doorways at Treasure Lake for a friend, and I made the pieces to replace the bad parts on the bottom from scratch using the table saw and the chop saw and jointer, and I have a planer and routers and all that stuff. And I also, like I've got this is the axle to the MG. So I was working on this spring. This is one of the main pieces I need to do the mechanical part. This would have the gears in it, and this would be the brakes. And I have all the parts. I'm ready to start assembling it because I've done all the basic work. It's basically kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle at this point. But I've done a lot of preparation work, sandblasting and other kind of things like that to get ready to put it all back together again. And then the other thing is the little wonder, if you want to go out and see that. Oh, the other thing, this is the backhoe. That was left in the forest for more than 10 years, and that the trees all grew around. And I was able to restore it and get it running again, primarily because this is a case, 1958 case backhoe, roughly. All the tags and stuff are missing, so it's hard to be exact. But Case had a deal with David Brown tractors in England, and so it's very similar to the MG. So even though it was broken, within just a day or two, I was able to figure out how it compared to the MG and how it would start. I don't know if this will scare him if I start it up. works, and that's one of the main things I used to build the garage that I had the video I showed. The railroad came about because he was a forester, and he would, one thing they would periodically do, he was the Clarion County forester for the state of Pennsylvania. This was after his blacksmithing career, and he would do shows for the state. The state would periodically have like festivals and different things where they'd have exhibits, and he came up with the idea of recreating the first steam locomotive in Jefferson County, which was called the Little Wonder. And he built this locomotive, which is back here, and it was pretty much, it's perhaps not an exact copy, but it's a very close copy of the original steam engine in Jefferson County, and it actually does work. And I've been working on, we hadn't used it for about 10 years, so I was doing some safety upgrades. I took it apart, took the steam boiler out, took it to the Amish in Ohio and had it rebuilt to make sure that it's safe and doesn't explode, which is a big issue with steam locomotives. And but all the mechanical stuff on it, it actually is functioning now. And I ended up changing the track gauge, which was a big project. It used to be 4'8", which is the standard railroad size of a full-size railroad. And I changed it to 2-foot gauge, which is, you can see because my feet are about a foot long. In order to in order to get it to fit in the yard. Also, it just took up so much room, and it cost so much for the railroad ties. I don't have to have full-size railroad ties. I can use half of a landscape top. But that required lifting this whole thing up, taking the wheels out, resizing the axles and everything, redoing the bearings, re-gearing the chain, which is on here. I think you can possibly see that it does, when you turn on the steam engine, it actually now drives it like this. And the Amish guys showed me that I can connect this to my air compressor hose, which I have here. Goes into my barn. And I can test all the gearing and the track and everything else just by connecting it up to compressed air. And that checks the safety also, make sure all my fittings are working correctly and everything else. And so all this stuff on the locomotive is functional, like the pressure gauge. This is the oiler for the pistons. This is a one-cylinder locomotive engine. And this is forward and reverse. And Mr. Gilmore built a brake, which I haven't reconnected yet, but I'm planning on doing that. I stop it really just by taking it out of gear, and it just kind of comes to a stop. And it's about ready to fire up with steam again for the first time in 10 years. Hoping to do here in October. Possibly talking about having an Oktoberfest gathering and having Mr. Gilmore operate it again, while giving me a lesson on how to do it myself. And so the thing I'm working on, in addition to the locomotive, is the track. And this turns out to be a pretty big landscaping job, building the track. These are the railroad ties I came up with. The fastening system Mr. Gilmore came up with, which is bolts with washers, rather than pounding in nails, which tend to loosen up and come apart. But little things like drilling and joining together the rails and getting the curve to work correctly is pretty challenging and takes quite a bit of time. Quite a bit more time than I'd imagined to build a railroad from scratch. So I've built a railroad grade crossing that I've been working on here. And this is so I can drive around to the back of the barn over something solid. And I can back my truck up, and also when the UPS truck comes or something and needs to turn around, they can back up in here. One thing, current challenge is to get the train to go around curbs better. And so I'm working on that. I seem to be like needing to bend these very carefully, and Mr. Gilmore gave me a rail bender, which I'm not sure where he found it. He seems to have a limitless supply of antique equipment that he finds at auctions and stuff. So that's what I'm working on with this right now.